What happens when the fairy tale shatters for Charlotte Hayes, 7 months pregnant and married to a millionaire? It happened in the middle of a Michelin star restaurant. Her husband, Sebastian Croft, didn't just walk out on their marriage. He walked out on the bill, leaving her humiliated and holding a 4-figure check. He thought he could break her, discard her like one of his disposable assets. But he made one catastrophic miscalculation. He forgot who his mother was. Before the sun rose the next day, it wasn't a lawyer Charlotte called. It was the one woman Sebastian never expected his own mother. And she wasn't offering condolences. She was ready to file charges. This is the story of how a mother's love for justice outweighed her love for her son. The weight of the crystal water glass felt heavier than usual in Charlotte Hayes' hand. Its meticulously etched surface, cool against her skin, was a small, solid thing in a world that had begun to feel terrifyingly fluid. Across the starched white linen of the table at Aurelia, one of New York's most obscenely expensive restaurants, her husband, Sebastian Croft, smiled. It was the smile he used for magazine covers and fawning investors. A brilliant predatory flash of white that never quite reached his steel blue eyes. To us, he said, raising his own glass of what was likely a $900 bottle of Bordeaux. And to new beginnings. Charlotte, 7 months pregnant, mirrored the gesture with her water. New beginnings, she echoed the words, tasting like ash in her mouth. She tried to locate the man she had fallen in love with in the chiseled, impassive face opposite her. 3 years ago, he was the charismatic tech mogul who had swept her off her feet, a whirlwind of helicopter dates, private gallery viewings, and a genuine infectious laugh that seemed to fill every room. She, an up-and-coming interior designer, had been captivated not by his wealth, but by his apparent passion for life, for building things for her. Now the passion was gone, replaced by a chillingly precise form of control. It had been a slow erosion. First came the comments about her friends, whom he deemed unambitious. Then came the suggestions about her career, which he felt was a cute hobby that distracted from her real responsibilities as Mrs. Sebastian Croft. Soon her credit cards were replaced with a single joint account card that sent an itemized alert to his phone with every purchase. He called it financial transparency. She knew it was a leash. The pregnancy had been her last desperate hope. A baby she had thought would surely reawaken the man she loved. It would give them a shared purpose, a bond that his burgeoning empire couldn't sever. For a while it seemed to work. He'd been attentive, even tender, placing a hand on her growing belly and whispering plans for the nursery in their cavernous Fifth Avenue penthouse. But in the last month, a new coldness had set in, more profound than ever before. He'd become distant, his nights spent at the office growing more frequent. Whispers from the tightly knit circle of the city's elite had reached her whispers of a new protégé at his company, a sharp-tongued, raven-haired woman named Cassandra Thorne. Sebastian had dismissed it as corporate jealousy. Tonight was supposed to be the reset. He had announced it this morning, his voice smooth and final. "We need a proper date night, Lottie. Just you and me. We'll go to Aurelia. We need to talk." And so they talked. Or rather, he did. He spoke of market projections of a new acquisition of his own brilliance. He barely asked about the baby, a fact that sent a sliver of ice through Charlotte's veins. She ate her seared scallops in near silence, the baby kicking against her ribs as if sensing its mother's distress. "You've been quiet tonight," Sebastian finally observed, dabbing his lips with a napkin. He leaned forward, the smile fading, replaced by a look of cold assessment. "Are you feeling unwell?" "I'm fine, Sebastian. Just thinking." "About what?" The question was sharp an interrogation. Charlotte took a deep breath, deciding to finally voice the fear that had been strangling her for weeks. About us. About what you meant by new beginnings. I was hoping it meant, a renewed focus on our family. On the baby. Sebastian leaned back, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He swirled the wine in his glass, watching the crimson liquid cling to the sides. The baby, of course. The Croft heir. That's a very important role. He looked at her, but his gaze was distant, as if she were a line item on a balance sheet. But a child doesn't fix foundational issues, Charlotte. You know that. What foundational issues? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Your discontentment. Your unhappiness, he said, framing it as her failing. A man in my position needs a partner, not a liability. He needs someone who adds value, who understands the mission. Lately, I feel like I'm managing two enterprises, my company and your emotions. Each word was a perfectly polished stone thrown with devastating accuracy. He was making this her fault. The loneliness, the isolation, the fear. It was all her discontentment. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, and she fought them back fiercely. She would not cry in front of him. I am not a liability, Sebastian. I am your wife, and I am carrying your child. He sighed, a theatrical display of exhaustion. And I've provided for you, lavishly. You live in a penthouse overlooking Central Park. You wear clothes that cost more than most people's cars. You wanted for nothing. I wanted you. The words burst out louder than she intended, causing a nearby table to glance over. She lowered her voice, a hot wave of shame washing over her. I wanted a husband, not a benefactor. Sebastian's face hardened into a mask of utter indifference. This was it. This was the moment the axe fell. That unfortunately is a commodity I'm no longer able to provide, he said, his voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial whisper. He reached into his jacket and pulled out not his wallet, but a single crisp envelope. He slid it across the table. It was thick, heavy with legal documents. What is this? Charlotte whispered, her hand hovering over it, afraid to touch it. That's my version of a new beginning, he said. It's a separation agreement. A very, very generous one, I might add. It contains the keys to a new apartment, a very nice one, fully furnished, and the details of a trust for the child. You'll be well taken care of, provided you sign it. No fuss, no lawyers, no mess. The world tilted. The distant chatter of the restaurant faded into a dull roar. He was divorcing her. Here. Now. You're leaving me. I'm giving you an exit ramp, Charlotte, he corrected. A clean break. This marriage was a mistake. A miscalculation on my part. I'm correcting it. He stood up, straightening his bespoke suit jacket. He looked down at her, his pregnant wife, with the detached pity one might show a stray dog. The bill is on its way. Consider it a final severance package, he said, his lips twisting into that horrific smile again. I've already moved my personal effects from the penthouse. My driver is waiting. Don't try to contact me. My lawyer will be in touch if you unwisely choose to contest this. And then he turned and walked away. He didn't look back. He strode through the restaurant, nodding to an acquaintance at the bar, and disappeared through the heavy oak doors, leaving Charlotte alone at the table, the unsigned divorce papers sitting between a half-eaten plate of lamb and a monumentally expensive bottle of wine. A few moments later, the waiter, a young man with kind, nervous eyes, approached the table. He held a small, leather-bound bill folder. Ma'am, he began, his voice hesitant as he took in the empty chair and the woman's shell-shocked expression. He placed the folder on the table. "Your check whenever you're ready." Charlotte stared at it. She knew Sebastian. She knew his taste, his need to always order the most expensive, the most exclusive. She slowly opened the folder. The number at the bottom seemed to leap off the page, a cruel 4-digit punchline to a joke she never understood. 2,145,017. And she was alone, pregnant with a dead-end credit card and a broken heart. Humiliation is a uniquely potent poison. It doesn't just wound, it paralyzes. For a full 5 minutes, Charlotte sat frozen, the open bill folder, a testament to her public execution. The murmur of the restaurant, once a sophisticated backdrop, now felt like a chorus of whispers directed at her. The abandoned wife. The fool. The woman who couldn't even keep her millionaire husband. The kind-eyed waiter, whose name tag read Leo, hovered nearby, a study in professional anxiety. He knew something was terribly wrong. Charlotte could feel his pity, and it was like salt in an open wound. She had to move. She had to do something. Her mind raced frantically, searching for a solution. The joint credit card Sebastian had given her was a trap. He would see the charge instantly, and it would become another piece of ammunition for his lawyers. "See, she's still trying to spend my money." Her personal debit card, linked to an account she'd kept from her old life, held less than $300, a pathetic sum in this new world she inhabited. Then she remembered. Tucked away in a small, forgotten clutch in the back of her closet was her runaway card. It was a credit card she'd opened herself a year ago, in her own name, using the small, sporadic income from a few freelance design projects she'd taken on against Sebastian's wishes. She had kept it a secret, a tiny act of rebellion, a lifeline she prayed she would never need. The limit was only 5,000, but tonight it might as well be 1,000,000. With trembling hands, she pulled out her phone and dialed for a taxi, her voice a strained whisper. Then she flagged down Leo. I'll take care of this now." She managed her voice steadier than she felt. She slid the secret card out of her wallet, shielding its name with her thumb. Leo took it, his relief palpable. "Of course, ma'am." He hurried away, leaving her alone once more with the damning envelope on the table. She couldn't bring herself to open it fully, but she could see the letterhead of a notoriously ruthless divorce attorney, Arthur Vance. She shoved the entire envelope into her oversized handbag, the paper feeling toxic to the touch. The walk out of Aurelia was the longest of her life. She kept her head held high, her eyes fixed on the exit, refusing to meet the curious gazes that followed her. The cool night air hit her like a slap, a welcome shock to her system. Her taxi was waiting. As she slid into the back seat, the weight of what had just happened finally crashed down on her. The drive back to the Fifth Avenue penthouse was a blur of streetlights and tears she could no longer hold back. Sobs racked her body, silent, agonizing spasms of grief and terror. The baby kicked a frantic, insistent rhythm against her ribs, as if trying to comfort or escape. "It's okay, little one," she whispered, her hand protectively on her stomach. "I've got you. I've got you." It was a promise she had no idea how she would keep. The doorman, a kind elderly man named Patrick, who always had a smile for her, greeted her with a concerned look. "Mrs. Croft. Is everything all right?" Mr. Croft's driver picked him up hours ago. He seemed in a hurry. "I'm fine, Patrick. Just a long night," she lied. forcing a weak smile. The elevator ride up to the penthouse felt like an ascent to a tomb. The doors opened onto their private foyer, and the silence was immediate and absolute. It was a dead silence, the kind that follows a storm. She stepped inside. The first thing she noticed was the empty space on the wall where a large, abstract painting he'd loved had hung. Then she saw the gaps on the bookshelves, the missing silver cigar box on the coffee table. She walked numbly through the sprawling apartment. In their shared closet, his side was bare. The racks of custom suits, the neat rows of Italian leather shoes, all gone. On his side of the bed, the nightstand was empty. Even his charging cables were gone. The efficiency of it all was the cruelest part. This wasn't a spontaneous act of anger. This was a meticulously planned operation. He had been packing his bags while she was picking out a dress for their date night. He had been orchestrating her public humiliation while she naively hoped for a reconciliation. The anger came then hot and clarifying, burning through the shock and grief. He hadn't just left her. He had tried to annihilate her. He wanted her to feel small, helpless, and utterly dependent on the generous crumbs he'd offered in that envelope. He expected her to crumble to take the deal and to disappear quietly. She sank onto the edge of the bed, the mattress still holding the faint scent of his cologne, a ghost in their shared space. Panic began to set in again. What was she going to do? Her family was in Ohio, a world away. Calling them would mean admitting the spectacular failure of her marriage, worrying her retired parents sick. Her friends, the few he hadn't managed to push away, would be sympathetic, but they couldn't possibly understand the scale of the battle she was facing. She was up against Sebastian Croft, a man who treated business and life like a war of attrition, a man who had limitless resources and zero scruples. She pulled out her phone, her thumb hovering over her mother's number. She couldn't do it. Not yet. She needed a plan. She needed leverage. She needed a miracle. Her eyes scanned the contacts list, a graveyard of forgotten friendships and society acquaintances. Then she saw a name she hadn't called in over a year, a name she was almost afraid to dial. Margaret Croft, Sebastian's mother. Her relationship with Margaret was complex and distant. Margaret was old money, a matriarch from a world of quiet inherited power that looked down on Sebastian's brash new money tactics. She was a woman of formidable composure and icy civility. She had never been overtly unkind to Charlotte, but there was always a sense of observation of judgment held in reserve. Margaret saw Charlotte. Charlotte suspected as just another one of Sebastian's acquisitions, prettier and with better manners than most, but an acquisition nonetheless. Calling her was a monumental risk. Margaret was fiercely loyal to the family name. She would likely side with her son, admonishing Charlotte for her part in the marriage's failure and advising her to take the deal and avoid a public scandal. It was the logical, pragmatic Croft thing to do. But as Charlotte sat there in the ruins of her life, a different memory of Margaret surfaced. It was from a family dinner about a year ago. Sebastian had been belittling Charlotte's design work, making a joke about her little hobby. Charlotte had simply gone quiet, as she'd learned to do. But across the table she had seen it a brief, sharp flash of disapproval in Margaret's eyes, a tightening of her jaw. It was gone in an instant, but Charlotte had seen it. Margaret hadn't defended her, but she had noticed, and she had not approved of her son's cruelty. It was a long shot, a desperate, wild gamble, but it was the only one she had. Her fingers shaking, she pressed the call button. The phone rang once, twice. She was about to hang up her courage, failing when a calm, clipped voice answered. Charlotte. It's past midnight. Is everything all right? Charlotte opened her mouth, but all that came out was a choked sob. There was a pause on the other end of the line, not of impatience, but of careful listening. Where are you? Margaret asked, her tone shifting from surprise to something more serious, more focused. The penthouse, Charlotte managed to say. Is Sebastian there? No. He left me. At the restaurant. He left me with the bill and divorce papers. The entire ugly story tumbled out in a rush of broken sentences. Another pause. Longer this time. Charlotte held her breath, expecting the cold dismissal the lecture. But when Margaret Croft spoke again, her voice was like ice. Not the ice of indifference, but the ice of a gathering storm. He did what the question hung in the air, sharp and brittle. It wasn't accusatory. It was clarifying. Margaret Croft was gathering facts, her mind working with the cold precision of a general assessing a battlefield. Tell me everything, Charlotte. Margaret commanded, her voice devoid of pity, but laced with an unnerving intensity. Start with the restaurant. What did he say? What exactly was in the envelope? Stammering at first, then with growing clarity, Charlotte recounted the entire evening. The condescending monologue, the pronouncements of her being a liability, the theatrical reveal of the separation agreement, and the final brutal act of leaving her with a nearly $3,000 bill. She explained how she'd paid with her secret credit card, the lonely taxi ride, and the shock of the empty closets. As she spoke, she could hear the faint scratching of a pen on the other end of the line. Margaret was taking notes. The lawyer. Margaret interrupted. Was it Arthur Vance? Yes, Charlotte whispered, stunned. How did you know? A dry, mirthless chuckle came down the line. Because Arthur is a shark who specializes in asset concealment for philandering husbands. Sebastian has had him on a retainer for the last 6 months. I make it my business to know these things. 6 months. The betrayal went deeper than Charlotte could have ever imagined. He'd been planning this for half a year, all while he was talking about nursery colors and holding her hand at sonograms. The thought made her physically ill. He thinks you'll be intimidated. Margaret continued, her voice hardening. He thinks you'll roll over and sign whatever he puts in front of you to avoid a fight. He has gravely underestimated you. And as it turns out, he has gravely underestimated me. There was a beat of silence before Margaret delivered the words that would change everything. Stay where you are. Don't touch that envelope again. Don't answer any calls or messages from him or anyone associated with him. I'll be there in 45 minutes. The line went dead. Charlotte sat in the silent penthouse, her mind reeling. She had expected a lecture, perhaps a bit of chilly advice. She had not expected a call to arms. The next 45 minutes were a blur of nervous energy. She walked from room to room, the opulent spaces now feeling like a movie set for a life that was no longer hers. She made a cup of herbal tea, her hands shaking so badly that hot water sloshed over the sides of the mug. True to her word, precisely 43 minutes later, the private elevator chimed. The doors opened to reveal Margaret Croft. She was not dressed for a late-night emergency visit. She was immaculate in a charcoal grey cashmere coat, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, a structured leather briefcase in one hand. She looked less like a concerned mother-in-law and more like a CEO arriving for a hostile takeover. She swept into the apartment, her sharp eyes taking in the empty spaces on the walls, the bare closets, the single teacup on the marble island. Her gaze finally landed on Charlotte, and for the first time, Charlotte saw a flicker of something beyond steel, a deep, weary sadness. "He has his father's worst instincts," Margaret said. Her voice quiet. It wasn't an apology, but a statement of fact. All of the ruthlessness, none of the charm that made it palatable. She walked over to Charlotte, and to Charlotte's utter astonishment, placed a cool, dry hand on her arm. The touch was brief, but it was a gesture of solidarity. "Let me be clear," Margaret said, her voice regaining its commanding tone. "My son has brought shame upon the Croft name. This isn't just an attack on you. It is an attack on the legacy I have spent my life preserving. And more importantly, it is an attack on my grandchild. I will not allow it." She gestured toward the sofa. "Sit. We have work to do." Margaret opened her briefcase on the coffee table. It was not filled with tissues and platitudes. It was filled with files, notebooks, and a tablet. She was a woman prepared for war. "First, you will not be signing his absurd agreement," she stated, pulling on a pair of slim reading glasses. "He wants a quiet, clean break, so he can install that little strumpet from his marketing department, Cassandra Thorne. Without any financial inconvenience. We are going to make this the most inconvenient, loud, and financially catastrophic event of his young life." The casual, dismissive way she said Cassandra's name confirmed every fear Charlotte had harbored. Margaret knew. She knew everything. "Sebastian believes his money makes him invincible." Margaret continued, her eyes flashing. "What he fails to understand is that my money, the family's money, which his entire enterprise was built upon, comes with its own power. A power he has forgotten he is subject to." She then laid out a history Charlotte had only ever glimpsed. The initial seed money for Sebastian's tech company hadn't come from venture capitalists, as he so often claimed in interviews. It had come from a trust. Margaret controlled a fund from her side of the family that stretched back to the railroad tycoons of the 19th century. Sebastian was a beneficiary, not the source. "He has access to profits, but I have influence over the principal," Margaret explained. "He has been moving assets, trying to shelter them in shell corporations under the guidance of Mr. Vance. He thinks I'm an old woman who spends her days at garden parties. He has forgotten that I sit on the board of 2 major banks, and that I still read every financial report generated by the family office." She pulled out a file. "This is a preliminary report from a private investigator I hired 3 months ago, when I first noticed Sebastian's unusual financial activity and heard the whispers about Miss Thorne." Charlotte stared at her dumbfounded. Margaret had been investigating her own son for 3 months. "I had hoped it was a passing indiscretion," Margaret said, a flicker of pain in her expression. "I hoped he would come to his senses. But leaving you pregnant in such a vile and public manner. This is a declaration of war. He has crossed a line from which there is no return." Margaret's focus was absolute. "Tomorrow morning, we are not calling a divorce lawyer. We are retaining a legal team. My team. And we are not merely filing for divorce. We are filing a multi-pronged complaint. We will petition for an emergency court order to freeze his personal assets, pending a full financial disclosure. We will file for sole physical and legal custody of the child with supervised visitation for him at our discretion. And we will use the incident at the restaurant as the cornerstone of a claim for intentional infliction of emotional distress." She looked directly at Charlotte, her gaze piercing. "But to do this, I need your full cooperation. I need you to be strong." Can you do that?" The question hung in the air. For the first time in months, a spark of hope ignited within Charlotte. It wasn't the weak hope of reconciliation. It was the fierce, burning hope for justice. She was not alone. She had an ally, an unexpected, formidable, and terrifyingly competent one. She straightened her back, meeting Margaret's gaze. The tears were gone, replaced by a cold resolve that mirrored the woman sitting across from her. "Yes," Charlotte said, her voice clear and strong. "Yes, I can." Margaret gave a single, sharp nod of approval. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Good. Now about that bill from Aurelia. Did you keep the receipt?" "Yes, it's in my purse." "Excellent," Margaret said, snapping her briefcase shut. "We'll be submitting that as our first exhibit. Let's see how Sebastian's board of directors feels about him abandoning his pregnant wife over a nearly $3,000 dinner bill. We are going to file charges on your behalf, Charlotte. Not in a criminal court, but in the court of public opinion and family law, where the sentences are far, far more costly." The next morning, Charlotte woke not in the cold, empty bed of the penthouse, but in a plush guest suite in Margaret Croft's sprawling pre-war apartment on Park Avenue. Sometime after 2 a.m., Margaret had insisted with the quiet authority of a 5-star general that Charlotte could not stay another night in a place that had been turned into a crime scene of emotional carnage. A silent driver had been summoned, and Charlotte, with a small overnight bag, hastily packed with essentials Margaret had provided, was spirited away into the night, waking up to the soft morning light filtering through silk curtains. For a moment Charlotte felt a disorienting sense of peace. Then the reality of her situation crashed back in. But this time it was different. The terror was still there, a low hum beneath the surface, but it was shadowed by a new, unfamiliar feeling purpose. By 8 a.m., she was seated in a leather-paneled office that smelled of old books and power. This was not the office of a mere divorce lawyer. This was the inner sanctum of Evelyn Vance, a woman whose name was uttered in hushed, reverent tones in New York's legal circles. She was in her late 60s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that made Margaret Croft seem warm and fuzzy by comparison. And crucially, she was Arthur Vance's older sister and arch-rival, a fact that brought a grim satisfaction to the room. Margaret had made the call at dawn. The meeting was not a consultation, it was a strategy session. "Let's be clear on the objective," Evelyn began, her voice crisp as she perused the notes Margaret had sent ahead. "Sebastian wants a quiet settlement that allows him to maintain his public image and the vast majority of his perceived wealth. Our objective is to deny him that. We will not be quiet, and the settlement will be anything but a token." She looked at Charlotte, her gaze analytical but not unkind. "Charlotte, I know this is difficult. The legal system is a blunt instrument. They will try to portray you as a gold digger, an unstable, emotional woman. You must be prepared for that." "I am," Charlotte said, her voice firm. She had spent the night steeling herself for this. "Good." Evelyn nodded. "Because we have a significant advantage. 2, in fact. The first is the sheer, unadulterated cruelty of his actions. Leaving a pregnant woman humiliated in a public restaurant is not a good look even for a titan of industry. It's primal, it's villainous, and a judge especially, a female judge, will not look kindly upon it. It establishes a pattern of behavior." "And the second advantage?" Charlotte asked. Evelyn's lips curved into a thin smile. "The second advantage is Margaret." Margaret, who had been listening silently, spoke up. My son has built a house of cards on a foundation of my family's money. He has leveraged assets from the Croft family trust to secure lines of credit for his more speculative ventures. These ventures are not officially part of his marital property. Evelyn and I are about to argue that they are. Evelyn slid a thick document across the mahogany desk to Charlotte. This is our initial filing. It is an emergency petition. We are asking the court for 3 things immediately. First, an ex parte restraining order preventing Sebastian from contacting you, coming near you, or liquidating any marital assets. Second, we are demanding he vacate the Fifth Avenue penthouse as it is marital property, and you, as a vulnerable pregnant woman who has been abandoned, have the greater need. Third, we are filing for temporary spousal and child support that is commensurate not just with his declared income, but with the lifestyle he established for you. Charlotte's eyes widened as she scanned the figures. The amount they were demanding was staggering. It wasn't just for living expenses. It was a strategic blow designed to get his immediate and undivided attention. He will fight this, Charlotte breathed. Of course he will, Evelyn said. And when he does, he will have to submit a full sworn financial affidavit. His brother Arthur will try to hide as much as possible. But they won't be expecting us to have a roadmap to his hidden accounts. That was Margaret's contribution. She opened her briefcase and produced a slim leather-bound ledger. For the last 5 years, I have had an independent accounting firm conduct a quarterly audit of the family trust and its related interests. Sebastian is aware of this, but he believes it's a mere formality. He has no idea that the firm reports directly to me. I know about the Shell Corporation in the Cayman Islands. I know about the art he purchased through a holding company and has stored in a Swiss free port. I know about the consulting fees paid to Cassandra Thorne's personal LLC. It's all here. The room was silent for a moment, as the weight of Margaret's betrayal of her son and her loyalty to justice sank in. This was not just a divorce. It was a meticulously planned demolition. The process will begin now, Evelyn said, picking up her phone. We filed the petition electronically. A process server is already on standby. Sebastian will likely be served at his office this afternoon, in front of as many people as possible. The rest of the day was a blur of activity. Charlotte signed affidavits, answered detailed questions about her marriage, and provided access to every email and text message she had from Sebastian. It was draining, like excavating her own heart for evidence. Margaret stayed by her side, a silent, formidable presence ensuring Charlotte ate, drank water, and stayed focused. Late that afternoon, Margaret's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, a flicker of grim satisfaction in her eyes. "It's done," she announced. The server delivered the papers to Sebastian in the middle of a board meeting. Charlotte could almost picture the scene, the hushed boardroom. The confusion, Sebastian's handsome face contorting first in disbelief, then in pure, unadulterated rage as he saw the names on the petition: Charlotte Hayes Croft, Ver. Sebastian Croft. And worse, the signature on the supporting affidavit from his primary financial backer, his own mother. The counterattack was immediate. Within the hour, news websites that catered to the tech and finance world began publishing articles. The narrative was clear, spun by a high-priced crisis PR firm. Tech visionary Sebastian Croft victim of acrimonious split, read one headline. The articles painted Charlotte as a demanding, unstable wife whose lavish spending and emotional outbursts had tragically fractured the marriage. They hinted that her pregnancy was a last-ditch effort to trap him. Charlotte felt sick as she read the lies, the cruel twisting of their life into a weapon against her. "Ignore it," Margaret commanded, taking the tablet from Charlotte's hands. "It's predictable. It's also a mistake on his part. He's trying to fight a public battle. We are fighting a legal one. Let him sling mud. We are building a fortress." The true blowback came via a phone call, not to Charlotte, who Sebastian was now legally barred from contacting, but to Margaret. She took the call in her private study. The heavy doors closed. Even so, Charlotte could hear the muffled sound of a man roaring with rage. The call lasted for nearly 20 minutes. When Margaret emerged, her face was pale, but her expression was resolute. "He is displeased," she said with monumental understatement. "He accused me of treason, of trying to ruin him. He threatened to cut me off to ensure I never see my grandchild." "Margaret, I am so sorry." Charlotte began, her heart aching for the woman who was sacrificing her own son for her. Margaret held up a hand, cutting her off. "Do not be sorry. I am not. I told him that he had already made his choice when he left you at that restaurant. I told him that every action has a consequence, and his were about to come due. And I informed him that if he ever wanted to see his child, he would do it on our terms, and that his first step was to fire Arthur Vance and hire an attorney who was interested in a swift and fair settlement." She took a deep, steadying breath. "He has sealed his own fate, Charlotte. Now we simply let the machine we've built do its work. The Croft war machine was fully engaged, and its target was one of its own." The first hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. To Sebastian, it must have felt like an eternity. To Charlotte, it felt like a lifetime crammed into 14 days. The world she had known had vanished, replaced by a strange new reality of legal consultations, strategic planning, and the quiet, gilded sanctuary of Margaret's Park Avenue residence. Sebastian, true to form, did not go quietly. Denied direct contact, he waged his war through proxies and the press. More articles appeared, each one more vicious than the last. Anonymous sources, friends of Sebastian, no doubt spoke of Charlotte's erratic behavior and unreasonable demands. A paparazzi photographer suddenly appeared outside Margaret's building, snapping photos of a visibly pregnant Charlotte getting into a car. The resulting headline was cruel: "The $1 million bump inside Charlotte Croft's pricey divorce demands." The public attacks were painful, but inside the war room of Evelyn Vance's office, they were systematically dismantled and repurposed. "This is a gift," Evelyn said, pointing to the paparazzi photo on a screen. "He's trying to paint you as greedy, but all a judge will see is a pregnant woman being harassed because her husband is a vindictive bully. He's documenting his own campaign of intimidation for us. Keep every article." His financial tactics were just as aggressive. He immediately froze the joint account, a pointless gesture since Charlotte was no longer using it. He sent a formal notice through his lawyer that he would no longer be paying the exorbitant maintenance fees on the Fifth Avenue penthouse, a move designed to force a sale. Evelyn and Margaret countered every thrust with a skillful parry. To the notice about the penthouse fees, Evelyn's office responded coolly that they were pleased he was vacating the marital home as per their petition, and that he could forward all future bills to their office, as they would be covered by the emergency support they were demanding. They filed a motion to have his PR firm's invoices submitted as part of his personal expenditures, arguing that he was using marital funds to defame his wife. The true masterstroke, however, came from Margaret. She had her banking connections place a compliance review on the lines of credit tied to the Croft family trust. It was a bureaucratic move perfectly legal, that had the immediate effect of freezing Sebastian's access to a huge pool of his operating capital. It was like cutting a main supply line to an army. Suddenly, his ability to wage an infinitely funded legal war was severely hampered. He was forced to fight with only the money he had managed to squirrel away, not the vast fortune he had always taken for granted. The day of the hearing arrived a cold grey morning. Charlotte dressed carefully, choosing a simple, elegant maternity dress in a deep navy blue. She was not a victim. She was a mother, fighting for her child's future. Margaret stood beside her, a pillar of strength in Chanel tweed. The courtroom was a small, sterile chamber. Sebastian was already there, standing with his brother Arthur. He looked haggard. The easy arrogance was gone, replaced by a tense, simmering fury. When his eyes met Charlotte's, she saw pure hatred, and it made her flinch. But then she felt Margaret's hand on her elbow, a small, grounding pressure, and she held his gaze without wavering. The hearing was a brutal, clinical affair. Arthur Vance, slick and overconfident, argued that the restraining order was an overreach, that Sebastian had been planning an amicable separation, and that Charlotte's demands were a form of extortion. He painted Sebastian as a generous husband, shocked by his wife's sudden greed. Then it was Evelyn's turn. She was calm, methodical, and devastating. She didn't raise her voice. She simply presented facts. "Your Honor," she began, "we are here because Mr. Croft, a man with a net worth in the hundreds of millions, decided the most appropriate way to end his marriage was to abandon his 7 months pregnant wife in a restaurant, leaving her to pay a bill of $2,845.17. She held up a copy of the receipt. The judge, a stern-faced woman in her 50s, peered at it over her glasses. Evelyn continued, her voice even. He did this after ensuring his closets were empty, and a punitive separation agreement was in her hands. He then orchestrated a press campaign to defame her. These are not the actions of a man seeking an amicable split. These are the actions of a bully attempting to coerce a vulnerable woman into submission. She then presented the preliminary evidence of the hidden assets, the shell corporations, the payments to Cassandra Thorne's LLC. With every document she produced, Arthur Vance's face grew paler, and Sebastian's jaw tightened. The judge listened, her expression unreadable. She asked a few pointed questions of Arthur, focusing on the timing of the asset movements. His answers were evasive and unconvincing. Finally, the judge looked at Sebastian directly. "Mr. Croft, do you have anything you wish to say about the incident at the Aurelia restaurant?" Sebastian stood, his voice tight with suppressed rage. "It was a private dinner, a misunderstanding. My wife is being overly emotional." The judge's eyes narrowed. "Overly emotional. It seems to me that being left alone pregnant with a nearly $3,000 bill is a situation that might provoke some emotion in even the most stoic individual." She then delivered her ruling. The restraining order was granted. The motion for Sebastian to vacate the penthouse was granted, and the request for temporary support was granted at a figure even higher than Evelyn had requested, with the judge citing Mr. Croft's bad faith actions and attempts to intimidate the petitioner. It was a total, unequivocal victory. Arthur Vance looked stunned. Sebastian looked as if he had been physically struck. As the judge adjourned, he turned his face a mask of fury and took a step towards the opposing table. "You," he hissed, his voice low and venomous, directed not at Charlotte, but at his mother. "You did this. You traitorous old witch. You will regret this." Court officers immediately moved towards him, but Margaret did not flinch. She met her son's gaze. Her own eyes filled with a chilling mixture of pity and resolve. "No, Sebastian. she said, her voice clear and carrying in the quiet room. "You did this to yourself. I am simply holding you accountable." The confrontation was the breaking point. That evening, a shaken Arthur Vance called Evelyn Vance. The war was over. Sebastian wanted to settle. The negotiations were swift and brutal. With Margaret's ledger as their guide, there was nowhere for Sebastian to hide his money. His attempts to undervalue his company were met with the threat of a full forensic audit, which would expose his financial maneuverings to his investors and board. The final reckoning came a week later in Evelyn's conference room. Sebastian sat on one side of a vast table, a new chastened lawyer beside him. He looked defeated. His empire was intact, but his invincibility was shattered. He had been outmaneuvered, outgunned, and brought to heel by the two women he had underestimated the most. Charlotte was granted the penthouse outright. A multi-million-dollar trust was established for the baby, untouchable by either parent until the child turned 25. She received a lifetime alimony settlement that guaranteed her financial independence forever. The terms were ironclad. When it was over, Sebastian signed the papers without a word. He stood, refused to look at Charlotte or his mother, and walked out of the room. The door clicked shut behind him, the final sound of a chapter of her life closing for good. In the silence, Charlotte looked at Margaret, tears welling in her eyes, not of sadness, but of profound, overwhelming gratitude. Margaret simply reached across the table and squeezed her hand. The alliance forged in a moment of crisis had held. The war was won. Freedom, Charlotte discovered, had a scent. It smelled like the fresh paint in her new apartment, a sun-drenched space in the West Village that she had picked out herself. It smelled like the lemon and lavender cleaning products she used, replacing the sterile chemical scent of the penthouse's cleaning service. Most of all, it smelled like the sweet, powdery aroma of baby lotion and new beginnings. 6 weeks after the settlement was signed, Charlotte gave birth to a healthy baby girl. She named her Grace, not after a family member, but for the virtue she had fought so hard to reclaim for herself. The penthouse, that monument to a life that had almost crushed her, was sold. Charlotte had no desire to live in a gilded cage, no matter how beautiful. With a portion of the proceeds and the security of the settlement, she purchased the West Village apartment and invested the rest under the guidance of a financial advisor, recommended by to no one's surprise Margaret. Her relationship with her former mother-in-law had evolved into something quiet and profound. The formalities were gone, replaced by a bond forged in shared purpose and mutual respect. Margaret was a frequent visitor, arriving not with the stiff obligation of a society matriarch, but with the genuine warmth of a doting grandmother. She would sit for hours, holding baby Grace, her steely composure melting away as she whispered stories and sang old lullabies. She never spoke of Sebastian. It was an unspoken agreement. His name was a ghost they had both exorcised from their lives. Charlotte heard through the grapevine that he had in fact married Cassandra Thorne in a quiet, unpublicized ceremony. His company had taken a significant reputational hit from the rumors surrounding the divorce, and several key investors had pulled out. He was still a wealthy man, but his meteoric rise had been checked. He had learned the hard way that some foundations are not meant to be broken. One sunny afternoon, as Charlotte was rocking Grace in the nursery, she had designed a room of soft creams, gentle greens, and whimsical watercolor animals. Margaret watched them from the doorway. "You've built a beautiful life here, Charlotte," she said, her voice softer than Charlotte had ever heard it. "We built it," Charlotte corrected, looking up at her. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Margaret. You saved me." Margaret walked into the room, and placed a hand on Charlotte's shoulder. "You saved yourself, my dear. You had the courage to make that first call. You had the strength to stand up and fight. I simply provided the ammunition. Never forget that." Looking down at her daughter, who was sleeping peacefully in her arms, Charlotte knew Margaret was right. The naive girl who had been so captivated by a billionaire's charm was gone forever. In her place was a woman, a mother who understood her own worth. She had been left alone at a table intended to be a footnote in a powerful man's story, but she had refused to be a victim. With the help of an unlikely ally, she had picked up a pen and written her own ending. The city hummed outside her window, a symphony of endless possibility. Her life was no longer about glittering parties or designer labels. It was about the simple, solid weight of her daughter in her arms, the warmth of the sun on her face, and the quiet, unshakable knowledge that she was finally truly in control of her own destiny. She was home. That's the incredible story of Charlotte Hayes Croft. A woman who turned a moment of profound humiliation into a declaration of independence. It's a powerful reminder that strength isn't about the absence of fear, but about acting in spite of it. Sebastian thought his money made him invincible, but he forgot that true power lies in integrity, courage, and the unbreakable bonds between women who refuse to be silenced. Charlotte and Margaret's story shows us that sometimes the most powerful ally you can have is the one you least expect. What did you think of Margaret's decision to side with her daughter-in-law against her own son? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. A signature. That's all it took to shatter a perfect life. For 9 months, she lovingly called him Arlo. She felt his every kick, his every hiccup under her heart. Her husband James held her hand, whispering promises of their future with their son Arlo. But in the cold, sterile light of the hospital room, as she held the official birth certificate for the first time, another name stared back at her. A name she didn't choose. A name she didn't know. It was in that silent, soul-crushing moment she realized the man she loved had made the most important decision of their lives without her. This isn't just a story about a name. It's about a lie so profound it could only be answered by the deadbolt click of a changed lock. The late afternoon sun of a crisp Boston autumn spilled across the Persian rug in the nursery, illuminating dust motes, dancing in the air like tiny golden fairies. Olivia traced the hand-painted giraffes on the mural, their long necks stretching towards a soft, cloud-like ceiling. Everything was perfect. Almost. For the past 6 months, this room in their sprawling Chestnut Hill home had been her sanctuary, a place of quiet anticipation, insulated from the subtle but immense pressures that came with marrying into the Sterling family. Her James was different. He was her anchor in the often choppy waters of his family's old money society. He was the one who saw her Olivia Chen, the art gallery curator with a sharp eye and a sharper wit, not just a suitable match for the Sterling heir. Their love story felt like a modern fairy tale. He'd walked into her gallery to appraise a piece for his mother, and had been captivated not by the art, but by the passionate way she spoke about it. He was handsome, kind, and to his family's quiet chagrin, utterly besotted with her. Now at 38 weeks pregnant, Olivia felt a nesting instinct so powerful it was a physical force. Every tiny detail of this room was a testament to her love for their unborn son. The crib, a sleek modern design she'd picked out, stood in stark contrast to the heavy ornate furniture that filled the rest of the 6-bedroom mansion. "It has no character," her mother-in-law Eleanor Sterling had commented during her last visit, running a dismissive manicured finger over the crib's smooth oak finish. A baby needs heritage. Wait. Olivia had just smiled, patting her enormous belly. He'll have plenty of that, Eleanor. We want him to have a little bit of lightness, too. The name was part of that lightness. Arlo Cole Sterling. Arlo for her late grandfather, a kind, gentle man who taught her how to paint. Cole because she simply loved the sound of it, strong and clear. James had agreed instantly. Arlo Cole Sterling, he'd whispered into her hair just last night. His hands splayed protectively over her stomach, feeling the baby's rhythmic movements. I can't wait to meet him, Liv. Our son. The memory was so sweet, so vivid, it made her ache. She lowered herself carefully onto the plush rocking chair, the one James had spent an entire Saturday assembling, and let out a contented sigh. Their life was a dream. The brownstone on Beacon Street had been traded for this palatial house when they found out she was pregnant. James's software company was thriving, and her gallery was gaining prestige. They had everything. But sometimes in the quiet moments, a sliver of unease would prick at her. It was in the way James's tone would shift when his mother called, a subtle deference creeping in. It was in the casual mentions of the family trust and the board meetings he now had to attend. He'd always shielded her from the most suffocating aspects of his lineage. But since the pregnancy, the Sterling name seemed to be closing in a gilded cage, masquerading as a life of privilege. The firstborn son carries the legacy Olivia Eleanor had told her over a tense lunch at the Harvard Club. It is a responsibility James is finally beginning to understand. Olivia had brushed it off. James loved her. James loved their plans for their son. The name was settled. The future was theirs to write. A sharp, low cramp seized her, stealing her breath. She gripped the arms of the rocking chair, her knuckles turning white. Another one followed stronger this time. Her heart began to pound, a frantic drum, against her ribs. She looked at the hospital bag, packed and waiting by the door. It was time. She called James, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. "It's happening," she breathed. "I'm on my way, Liv. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I love you." As she waited, she walked one last time around the nursery, her hand trailing over the crib, the changing table, the bookshelf filled with stories she couldn't wait to read. "We're going to meet you soon, Arlo," she whispered to her belly. "We're so ready for you." The contraction that hit her as she heard James's car screech into the driveway was so intense it brought her to her knees. This was it. The end of the waiting. The beginning of everything. She had no idea how right she was. The first 24 hours were a blur of primal effort and transcendent joy. The labor was long and arduous, but James was by her side, a steady presence, his hand in hers, his voice a constant stream of encouragement. And then at 4:17 a.m., their son arrived with a lusty cry and a full head of dark hair, just like his father's. When the nurse laid him on her chest, warm and squirming, the world dissolved. Nothing else existed. Not the sterile smell of the hospital room. Not the exhaustion clawing at her bones. Not the subtle tension that had been humming beneath the surface of their lives. There was only the weight of her son, the soft press of his cheek against her skin. "He's perfect, Liv." James whispered, his voice thick with emotion as he kissed her forehead, then the baby's head. "Just perfect. Arlo." She sighed, tears of happiness streaming down her face. "Hi, Arlo." They spent the next day in a blissful bubble. Visitors were kept to a minimum at Olivia's request. Even Eleanor was held at bay, a fact for which Olivia was profoundly grateful. It was just the three of them, a new family learning the rhythms of each other. James was a natural changing diapers, with a surprising lack of squeamishness, and rocking the baby to sleep with a low, rumbling hum. Olivia watched him, her heart so full she thought it might burst. The doubts, the whispers of unease, all felt like a distant dream. This was real. This was their life. On the second day, a perky administrative nurse bustled in, clipboard in hand. "Good morning. I just have the official paperwork for you to review and sign off on. The birth certificate information and Social Security application." "Of course," Olivia said, carefully, shifting the sleeping baby in her arms. James, who had been dozing in the uncomfortable armchair, stood up. "I can take care of that, honey. You just rest with him." He took the clipboard and leaned against the window, his back to her as he scribbled his signature. It seemed like a small, helpful gesture. A husband taking on the bureaucratic chores while his wife recovered. Olivia smiled, pulling the baby's blanket up to his chin. "All set," James said, handing the clipboard back to the nurse with a charming giggle. "Thank you so much." The nurse beamed at him before turning to Olivia. "And here is your souvenir copy of the birth certificate application. The official one will be mailed in a few weeks. Congratulations again, you two. He's a beautiful baby." She placed a crisp, heavy piece of paper on the bedside table and left. Olivia, feeling a flutter of sentimentality, reached for it. She wanted to see his name in print. Arlo Cole Sterling, the official declaration of his existence. Her fingers brushed the paper, and she lifted it. Her eyes scanned past the hospital name, the date, the weight and length, down to the box labeled Name. And there it was, printed in stark black official letters. Arthur James Sterling IV. The name didn't register at first. It was a jumble of letters that made no sense, like a foreign language. She blinked, her sleep-addled brain trying to process the information. Arthur. Where did that come from? Arthur was James's late grandfather, a famously ruthless patriarch who had built the Sterling Empire through hostile takeovers and an iron will. He was a man Eleanor lionized, and James had always spoken of with a complicated mixture of fear and resentment. Her eyes darted back to the paper, willing the letters to rearrange themselves into the name she knew, the name she'd whispered into her belly for months. Arlo Cole Sterling. But they remained stubbornly, cruelly the same. Arthur James Sterling IV. A cold dread, sharp and swift, pierced through her postpartum euphoria. It started in her stomach and spread through her veins, turning her blood to ice. The baby in her arms suddenly felt impossibly heavy. James. Her voice was a small, tight thing, unrecognizable. He was looking at his phone, a faint smile on his face as he typed. He didn't look up. "Yeah, babe, James, what is this?" she asked, her voice gaining a dangerous edge. She held the paper out, her hand trembling so violently the words blurred. He finally looked up, and for a fleeting second, she saw a flash of pure panic in his eyes. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a practiced, placating calm that she suddenly terrifyingly recognized as the Sterling face. "Oh, that," he said, walking over. He wouldn't meet her eyes, focusing instead on a spot on the wall behind her. "Liv, we need to talk about that. Talk about it." She repeated the words, feeling like shards of glass in her mouth. The baby stirred, sensing her distress, and let out a soft whimper. "What is there to talk about?" This is a mistake. A typo. His name is Arlo. It's not a mistake, James said quietly, finally forcing himself to look at her. His expression was a carefully constructed mask of gentle reason, but his eyes were pleading. I named him Arthur. The world tilted. The sterile white walls of the hospital room seemed to be closing in on her. The rhythmic beep of the monitor beside her bed was a countdown to a detonation she hadn't seen coming. You named him Arthur, she whispered, the betrayal so immense, so absolute, it was a physical blow. You did this. Without me, while I was in labor, you went behind my back and changed our son's name. It was for the best. Olivia. For the family. For his future. His future. What about our future? The one we planned together. The one that included our son Arlo. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. The screen lit up. A text from Mother. Is it done? I'm transferring the funds to the new trust now. You've made your grandfather proud. Olivia saw it. Her vision narrowed on the glowing screen. The text message was a confession, a motive, a co-conspirator. This wasn't just James. This was Eleanor. This was a transaction. Her baby, her son, had been a commodity in a deal she knew nothing about. It was my mother, James, started seeing where she was looking. There's a trust, a significant one. It was contingent on the firstborn son being named Arthur. It secures his entire future, Liv. College, a house, anything he ever wants. He had a secure future, she hissed, her voice low and venomous. She was shaking with a rage so profound it scared her. He had us. That was supposed to be enough. You sold his name. You sold our son's name without telling me. Olivia, please be reasonable. Reasonable. The word was a laugh, sharp and broken. You lie to me for months. You let me paint Arlo's room. You let me call him by that name. You hold my hand while I'm screaming in pain, all the while knowing you're going to erase a part of me, a part of us on a legal document the second you get the chance. And you want me to be reasonable. She looked down at the baby in her arms. This beautiful, perfect stranger, now saddled with the legacy of a man, he'd never know a name that felt like a brand seared onto his skin. And in that moment, the love for her husband curdled into something cold and hard and unrecognizable. She looked at James, at his handsome, pleading face, and saw not the man she loved, but a stranger wearing his skin, a pawn in his mother's dynastic games. Get out, she whispered. Liv, please. Get out. Her voice cracked, but it held a core of steel he had never heard before. Get out of this room. Now. He hesitated, then saw the look on her face and knew there was no arguing. He backed away slowly, his hands held up in a gesture of surrender, and slipped out the door, closing it softly behind him. Olivia was left alone in the silent room, with the beep of the monitor, the weight of her son, and the crushing weight of the lie. She looked from the baby's innocent face to the birth certificate. Arthur James Sterling IV. It was a declaration of war, and she had no intention of losing. The ride home from the hospital was a study in suffocating silence. The brand-new top-of-the-line car seat sat in the back of their Range Rover, a throne for a tiny prince whose very identity was a battleground. Olivia sat in the back with the baby, her body angled away from James, creating a physical barrier that mirrored the chasm that had opened between them. James tried sporadically to breach the silence. The house is all ready for him. he said, his eyes finding hers in the rear-view mirror. Mrs. Gable stocked the fridge. Olivia stared out the window, watching the familiar scenery of Chestnut Hill slide by. The stately brick homes, the manicured lawns, the ancient, sprawling oaks. It all looked different now, alien. The beautiful facade of their life had been ripped away, and all she could see was the ugly, rotting framework beneath. "Liv, I know you're angry," he tried again. His voice strained. "But when you think about what this means for him, for his future—" "Stop talking about his future," she said, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. "You forfeited the right to do that when you made a unilateral decision about his present." He flinched, as if struck. The rest of the drive passed in silence. When they pulled into the long, sweeping driveway of their home, Olivia's heart, which she thought couldn't sink any lower, dropped. There, parked near the grand entrance, was Eleanor's black Mercedes, her driver standing stoically by the door. "What is she doing here?" Olivia demanded, her exhaustion warring with a fresh surge of adrenaline. She wanted to be here to welcome her grandson home. "James," said his voice, taking on that familiar, deferential tone. "The first Arthur in 2 generations. It's a big day for her." Her grandson, Olivia, repeated the words, tasting like poison. She looked down at the sleeping baby. She bought and paid for this moment, didn't she? Well, I hope she enjoys it. Without waiting for James to open her door, she got out, unbuckled the car seat with practiced numb efficiency, and carried her son towards the house, her sanctuary, that now felt like enemy territory. Eleanor was waiting just inside the marble foyer, dressed in a Chanel tweed suit, her face a perfect mask of benevolent matriarchy. "Olivia, darling," she cooed, gliding forward, her arms outstretched. "Let me see him. Let me see my little Arthur." Olivia instinctively tightened her grip on the car seat, taking a step back. "He's sleeping. Eleanor." "Oh, a little peek won't hurt," she insisted, her smile not quite reaching her cold, assessing eyes. She peered into the carrier. "Oh, James, he has the sterling chin. Arthur will be so proud." She spoke of her late husband as if he were in the next room. The sight of this woman, the architect of her betrayal, gloating in her foyer, was more than Olivia could bear. She felt a wave of dizziness, the postpartum hormones, sleep deprivation, and white-hot rage churning into a toxic cocktail. "I need to take him upstairs," Olivia said, pushing past her and James. "He needs to be fed." She fled up the grand, curving staircase, her footsteps muffled by the thick runner. She could hear their voices below, James's low and placating, Eleanor's crisp and commanding. She didn't want to hear them. She locked the door to the master bedroom suite, a click that echoed the shutting down of her own heart, and finally allowed herself to break. She laid the baby in his bassinet beside the bed and sank to the floor, silent sobs racking her body. She cried for the loss of her son Arlo. She cried for the loss of her husband, the man she thought she knew, and she cried for her own naivety, for believing their love could conquer the gravitational pull of the sterling name and its fortune. Hours passed. She fed the baby, she changed him. She held him close, whispering the name she'd chosen for him, over and over again, a desperate incantation. "Arlo. Your name is Arlo." Late in the evening, a soft knock came at the door. "Liv. It's me. My mother's gone." Olivia didn't move. "Liv, please open the door. We can't go on like this. Let me in. Let's talk." "There's nothing to talk about," James, she called out, her voice raw. Of course there is. This is our home. You can't just lock me out. It stopped feeling like my home the moment I saw that birth certificate, she replied. She heard him sigh in frustration. Fine. Be like this. I'm going out for a bit to let you cool down. I'll be back later. We will talk about this, Olivia. She listened to his footsteps retreating down the hall, the heavy front door opening and closing. To let you cool down. The condescension in his tone was the final straw. He still didn't get it. He thought this was a tantrum, a hormonal fit. He didn't understand that he had fundamentally broken the trust that was the bedrock of their marriage. He thought he could wait her out. She stood up, her movements stiff but resolute. A cold, clear purpose settled over her. He wanted to wait for her to cool down. He was going to be waiting a very long time. She picked up her phone, the same phone that had received his loving texts just days ago. She opened a web browser and typed 24/7 Locksmith Chestnut Hill. The first result had a glowing green button, Emergency Service. She pressed it. A man with a kind, weary voice answered on the second ring. Harrison Lock and Key. Bill speaking. Hello. Olivia said, her voice steady and clear. I need someone to come and change the locks on my house. All of them, as soon as possible. Is this an emergency, Mom? A domestic situation? Olivia looked at the sleeping baby, at the opulent room that felt like a prison. She thought of James's casual betrayal and Eleanor's triumphant smile. Yes, she said, a strange sense of calm washing over her. Yes, it is. I can have a technician there in 45 minutes. Thank you, Olivia said. I'll be waiting. She hung up the phone. She went to the nursery, their nursery, and looked at the name Arlo, spelled out in soft blue wooden blocks on a shelf. With deliberate, precise movements, she took them down. She then walked through the house, a ghost in her own life, gathering every trace of the future that had been stolen. The little onesie that said, Future Artist. A nod to her profession. The silver cup engraved with the letter D from her own parents. She packed it all into a box. When the locksmith arrived, a quiet professional man named Kevin, she let him in. He took in the scene, the new mother with haunted eyes, the palatial, silent house, the request to change every single lock, and simply nodded. He didn't ask questions. He just got to work. For the next 2 hours, the house was filled with the sounds of drilling and hammering, the sounds of fortifications being built. With each turn of the screwdriver, each click of a new tumbler falling into place, Olivia felt a layer of her grief and helplessness fall away, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. By 11 p.m., it was done. Kevin handed her a set of new, gleaming brass keys. That's the front backside door and the garage interior door, ma'am. You have the only copies. Thank you, Kevin, she said, transferring a significant sum to him via her phone. Thank you for your discretion. Of course. Good night, ma'am. She locked the door behind him, engaging the new, unfamiliar deadbolt. The sound was deep, final, and satisfying. She was alone with her son in a fortress of her own making. She was watching the baby monitor from her bed when she saw the headlights of James's Range Rover sweep across the driveway just after midnight. She watched him walk to the front door, a silhouette against the motion-activated floodlights. She saw him put his key in the lock and fail. He tried again, jiggled it. She could imagine the confused frustration on his face. He walked to the side door. The same result. His phone buzzed on the nightstand beside her bed. It was him. She ignored it. It buzzed again and again. Then a text message appeared on the screen. Liv. What the hell is going on? My key isn't working. Olivia picked up her phone. Her fingers were steady as she typed her reply. Your key doesn't work because it's not your house anymore, James. You made your choice. You chose your mother and a trust fund over your wife and son. You made a decision about our family without me. So now I'm making one without you. You are not welcome here. Find somewhere else to sleep. She sent the message. Then she turned her phone to silent, rolled over, and faced her son, sleeping peacefully in his bassinet. The war had just begun, but for the first time since seeing that name on the birth certificate, she felt like she had an army, and its first victory was the silence on the other side of the locked door. The silence lasted for precisely 7 minutes. Then the assault began. James's first tactic was pleading. A string of text messages flooded her phone, each more desperate than the last. Liv, this is insane. It's freezing out here. Let me in. We need to talk this out face to face. You, me. No one else. Please, Olivia, think about the baby. He needs his father. He needs his father. The hypocrisy of that statement was so staggering, it almost made her laugh. She pictured James standing on their perfectly manicured lawn, lit by the tasteful landscape lighting he'd been so proud of, unable to enter his own $1 million home. The image gave her a grim satisfaction. When the texts went unanswered, the knocking started. Not the polite rap of a visitor, but a hard, insistent pounding that vibrated through the solid oak door. Olivia. Open this door now. The baby stirred in his bassinet, his little face scrunching up. Olivia's resolve hardened. She would not allow him to terrorize them. She picked up the baby, holding him close her body, a shield against the noise. The pounding stopped. A moment of quiet. Then the doorbell began to ring, a frantic, incessant chime. He was leaning on it. A petulant child denied his way. Olivia walked to the upstairs window that overlooked the front entrance, staying hidden behind the heavy damask curtain. She saw him there, his handsome face contorted with fury, his fist still raised from banging on the door. He looked utterly lost. Good. After 5 solid minutes, the chiming stopped. He was pacing now, a caged animal, his phone pressed to his ear. She knew with chilling certainty who he was calling. 20 minutes later, a second pair of headlights sliced through the darkness. The sleek black nose of Eleanor's Mercedes sedan purred to a stop behind James's Range Rover. Eleanor Sterling emerged from the passenger side, not in a tweed suit this time, but in a silk dressing gown and a cashmere wrap, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, even at 1 in the morning. She looked not like a concerned grandmother, but like a queen arriving to quell a peasant uprising. She marched up to her son, her movements sharp and angry. Olivia couldn't hear their words, but she could see the pantomime of the conversation. James gesticulating wildly at the house. Eleanor patting his arm, then turning a gaze of pure venom towards the master bedroom window, as if she could sense Olivia watching. Eleanor took out her own phone. A moment later, Olivia's phone lit up with a call from a number she knew by heart. She let it go to voicemail. A text immediately followed. Eleanor, Olivia. This childish theatrical display is beneath you. It is certainly beneath a Sterling. You will open this door at once and stop this nonsense. Olivia felt a surge of defiance. She typed a reply not to Eleanor but to James. Get your mother off my property. This is between you and me. Her presence here proves my point. You are not a husband or a father. You are a puppet. This conversation is over until she is gone. She watched from the window as James read the text. He showed it to his mother. Eleanor's mouth thinned into a hard white line. She gestured angrily, clearly refusing to leave. James looked from his mother's furious face to the dark, silent house. He looked trapped. He looked weak. Olivia had a sudden, brilliant idea. She went to the smart home control panel on the wall, the one James had installed, that controlled everything from the lights to the sound system to the sprinklers. Her heart pounded as she scrolled through the options. There it was. Irrigation System Zone 1, Front Lawn. She pressed the manual start button. On the lawn below, every single sprinkler head erupted with a vengeance, sending powerful jets of cold water arcing across the pristine grass. A direct hit soaked James and Eleanor, who let out an indignant shriek. "What is the meaning of this?" Eleanor screeched, shielding her silk robe as if it were under attack from acid rain. James scrambled away from the spray, looking up at the house in disbelief. Olivia allowed herself a small, bitter smile. If they wanted a theatrical display, she would give them one. The drenched and furious duo retreated to Eleanor's car. For a few minutes they just sat there, the car's interior light illuminating their heated discussion. Finally, the Mercedes backed slowly out of the driveway and disappeared down the street. James's Range Rover remained. He was staying, laying siege. He sent one final text. "Fine, you win for tonight. But this isn't over, Liv, not by a long shot." Olivia watched him get back into his car, recline the driver's seat, and plunge the interior into darkness. She stood at the window for a long time, watching the car that held the man who was now a stranger to her. The siege of Stirling Manor had begun, but the woman inside was no damsel in distress. She was the commander of the fort, and she had just won the first battle. Sleep would not come easily, but as she lay down, the keys to her new kingdom safe on the nightstand, she knew she had done the right thing. The locks were not just on the doors, they were around her heart, and James no longer had the key. The next morning, the Range Rover was gone. A small part of Olivia felt a pang of something not regret, but a hollow echo of the life that had vanished overnight. She quickly quashed it. This was not a time for sentimentality. This was a time for strategy. After a mostly sleepless night, spent feeding the baby and watching the driveway, Olivia knew she couldn't do this alone. The Stirlings had wealth influence and a team of lawyers who could crush people for sport. She had her wits, a newborn son, and a righteous fury that was quickly solidifying into cold, hard resolve. She needed her own army. Her first call was to her parents in California. She told them everything, her voice cracking as she recounted the story of the birth certificate. Their reaction was immediate and unequivocal. "You're flying out here today, honey," her father, a retired architect, said, his voice tight with anger. "Both of you. We'll get you the best family lawyer in the state." "No, Dad," Olivia said, surprising herself with her own firmness. "I'm not running. This is my home. He abandoned this home, not me. I'm staying here. But I do need a lawyer. The best one in Boston." Her second call was to that lawyer, a woman named Kate Mercer, a notorious shark in the world of high-net-worth divorces, recommended by a friend from the art world who had gone through a similarly messy split. He did what Kate asked after Olivia explained the situation, a note of impressed disbelief in her voice. Changed the name on the birth certificate for a trust fund, Honey. In 20 years of doing this, that's a new one. It's a violation of trust so profound it's almost poetic. We can work with this. The validation in Kate's voice was like a balm. "What do I do?" Olivia asked. "You sit tight and you don't speak to him or his mother. You document everything. Every text, every call, every time he drives by the house. And you start looking. Men like James' families, like the Sterlings. The name on the birth certificate isn't the only secret they're keeping. Look for financial statements, trust documents, anything he might have left behind." Following Kate's advice, Olivia turned her home into an intelligence-gathering headquarters. During the baby's nap times, she began a methodical search of James's home office, a space she'd rarely entered. It was a masculine sanctuary of dark wood leather and the smell of expensive cologne. It was also a treasure trove. Tucked away in a locked drawer of his desk, a lock she pried open with a screwdriver, from the kitchen she found it. A folder labeled Sterling Family Trust, AJS 4. Her hands trembled as she opened it. It was all there in black and white. A sub-trust of the main Sterling family fortune, established by Arthur Sterling Sr. decades ago. It stipulated that the firstborn male heir of his grandson James would inherit a staggering sum upwards of $20 million, provided the child was legally named Arthur James Sterling IV. The money would be managed by a trustee until the boy's 25th birthday. The trustee Olivia saw with a jolt of ice in her veins was Eleanor Sterling. The betrayal was deeper than she could have imagined. This wasn't just about securing their son's future. It was about control. Eleanor would hold the purse strings not just for her grandson, but indirectly for James and Olivia as well. They would be beholden to her for any major expense, any significant life choice. The name wasn't just a name, it was a leash. As she dug deeper, she found more. Statements for credit cards in James's name she'd never seen before, with charges for lavish dinners in the financial district, hotel suites, and what looked like rent payments on a luxury apartment in the Seaport district, an apartment she knew nothing about. Who was he meeting? What was he hiding? The perfect husband, the doting father-to-be was a construct, a facade. And she had been living in the stage set he'd built. Just as she was reeling from these discoveries, her phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize. She almost ignored it, but something told her to answer. "Is this Olivia?" A young woman's voice asked, hesitant and quiet. "Who is this?" It's Chloe, James's sister." Olivia's guard went up immediately. Chloe was the youngest Sterling, a free-spirited artist who had always been kind to her, but was still undeniably a Sterling. "What do you want, Chloe? I heard what happened." Chloe's voice was barely a whisper. "My mother she's on a rampage." "I'm so sorry, Olivia." What James did was unforgivable. Tears pricked Olivia's eyes. It was the first time someone from his side had acknowledged the depth of the betrayal. "He told me you locked him out," Chloe continued. "Good for you. Honestly, why are you calling me Chloe?" Olivia asked, still wary. "Because I hate what my family does to people, what my mother does. She did it to my father. She did it to James. And now she's trying to do it to you and your son. There's something you need to know. The Arthur Trust. It's not just about the money." Olivia sat down, clutching the phone. "What do you mean?" "My grandfather. Arthur was a monster," Chloe said, her voice shaking slightly. "A controlling, abusive man. The trust comes with conditions, bylaws. The trustee, my mother, has the power to make decisions about the beneficiary's education, upbringing, even their approved place of residence, if she deems the parents unfit or not acting in the best interests of the Sterling legacy." The room spun. Unfit. It was a weapon. Eleanor could use any misstep, any deviation from her plan to declare Olivia unfit and gain legal influence over her son's life. Changing the locks, filing for divorce, it could all be twisted and used against her. She's already talking to the family lawyers, Olivia Chloe warned. She's trying to paint you as unstable, hysterical, a new mother suffering from postpartum psychosis. She's going to try and take your baby. The threat landed with the force of a physical blow. This was no longer just a marital dispute. It was a war for her child. "Why are you telling me this?" Olivia whispered. "Because James was too weak to stand up to her. But maybe you're not. And because that little boy deserves to be Arlo, not a pawn named Arthur." Check the prenuptial agreement, Olivia, the one she had her lawyers draft. Check the fine print under the family legacy clause. James probably doesn't even know it's in there. The call ended. Olivia's mind raced. The prenup. She'd barely read it at the time, swept up in love and trusting James when he said it was just a formality to protect the family business. She found her copy in their safe. With trembling fingers, she flipped to the clause Chloe had mentioned, and there it was buried in dense legalese, a stipulation that in matters pertaining to the cultural and financial heritage of any children, the decisions of the Sterling Family Trust's appointed trustee would be given significant legal weight. She had signed it. Years ago, she had signed a document that handed Eleanor Sterling the keys to her future child's life. But Chloe's call had given her more than just a warning. It had given her an ally, an inside source, and it had revealed her enemy's playbook. Eleanor expected her to be hysterical, emotional, unstable. Fine. She would be the exact opposite. She would be cold, calculating, and armed with information. She photocopied every document, every statement. She took pictures. She uploaded everything to a secure cloud server and shared it with her lawyer, Kate. The siege might be happening at her front door, but the real war would be fought with paper and secrets. And she was finally ready to fight back. 3 days after changing the locks, Olivia made her move. The house had become her fortress and her war room. Chloe's intel combined with the documents she'd uncovered formed a powerful arsenal. She was no longer just a wounded wife. She was a woman with a strategy. Through her lawyer, Kate Mercer, she arranged a meeting. Not at the house and not at a Sterling-owned office building. She chose a neutral, sterile location, a conference room at a high-end mediation center in downtown Boston. It was a place devoid of history or power dynamics, a blank slate where the truth could be laid bare. She stipulated the terms of the meeting. James was to come alone. No lawyers present in the room, though Kate would be waiting in an adjacent office. No Eleanor. This was a conversation between a husband and a wife, or what was left of them. Olivia arrived first. She chose a seat at the long, polished table that did not face the door, forcing him to walk in and see her already in a position of power. She wore not a mourning wife's attire, but a sharp black pantsuit she'd favored for tough negotiations at the gallery. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant bun. When James walked in, she wanted him to see not the new mother he'd betrayed, but the woman he had underestimated. He entered looking haggard. He hadn't been sleeping. His expensive suit was rumpled, and his eyes were red-rimmed. He looked at her, and his face was a mix of desperation and hope. "Liv," he breathed, starting towards her. "Thank you for doing this." She held up a hand, a gesture that stopped him cold. "Sit down, James." He flinched at her tone, the warmth completely gone, replaced by a chilling calm. He sat opposite her, the expanse of polished mahogany between them, feeling like a mile-wide canyon. "I didn't arrange this meeting to reconcile," she began, her voice steady and measured. "I didn't arrange it to hear more apologies or excuses. I arranged it to present you with your options." She slid a sleek, leather-bound folder across the table towards him. Option A. He opened it. Inside was a petition for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. Attached to it were copies of the credit card statements for his secret apartment printouts of the trust documents and a highlighted copy of the prenup's family legacy clause. "That is a divorce filing," she explained coolly. "In it, I will be petitioning for sole physical and legal custody of our son, citing emotional distress fraud and a conspiracy between you and your mother to coerce me into a binding legal arrangement concerning my child under false pretenses. I will be using the evidence in that folder, your secret apartment, the financial deceit, the predatory nature of the trust your mother controls, to paint a picture of a marital environment built on lies. I will argue that you and your family are not a fit environment for a child. And given your actions, James, I think I'll win." He stared at the papers, his face pale. He looked utterly broken. "Liv, no. Please. I never wanted any of this." "You're right," she agreed, her voice cutting through his plea. "You didn't want any of this. You wanted everything. You wanted the wife and the perfect family, and you wanted Mummy's trust fund. You wanted the applause for being a modern husband while still cashing the check for being a dynastic son. The problem is you can't have both." She let the silence hang in the air, heavy and suffocating. Then she slid a second identical folder across the table. Option B. He looked at her confused before opening the second folder. Inside was a different set of documents. The first was a legal petition to change their son's name from Arthur James Sterling IV to Arlo Cole Sterling. The second was a post-nuptial agreement drafted by Kate that explicitly nullified the family legacy clause of their original prenup. It stated in no uncertain terms that all decisions regarding their child's health education and upbringing would be made jointly by Olivia and James, and by them alone. It also included a financial transparency clause requiring quarterly reviews of all family assets and liabilities to be conducted by a neutral third-party accountant. The third document was a brochure for a renowned marriage and family therapist specializing in intrusive family dynamics. Option B is the only other path forward. Olivia stated, her eyes locking onto his. It is not a path back to where we were. That place doesn't exist anymore. This is a path to something new, and it begins with these non-negotiable terms. She laid them out one by one, like a general issuing commands. First, you will sign the petition to change his name today. We will file it before we leave this building. Our son will be Arlo. He will not be a financial instrument for your mother. Second, you will sign the post-nuptial agreement. You will sever the financial and legal umbilical cord to your mother. The Arthur Trust can rot for all I care. We will live on what we earn. Your company, my gallery. If it means selling the house in Chestnut Hill and moving into a smaller place, so be it. I would rather live in a studio apartment with a man I can trust than in a mansion with a puppet. Third, you will go to your mother. You will tell her that you are your own man, that your wife and son are your primary family now, and that she will have no say in how we raise him. Her access to her grandson will be contingent on her respect for me as his mother and as your wife. And finally, Olivia's voice softened almost imperceptibly. You and I will go to counseling. We will go for a year, and you will fight every single day to to earn back a fraction of the trust you shattered. You will have to prove to me that you chose me, not that you were cornered into it." She leaned back in her chair, her part said. She had laid her cards on the table. One folder represented an ending, the other a brutal, difficult, uncertain beginning. The choice was his. James stared at the two folders, his head in his hands. He was silent for a long time. The only sound in the room, his own ragged breathing. He looked up, his eyes filled with tears. "She'll disown me," he whispered. "The trust, the board seat, everything. She'll cut me off completely." Olivia's face was unreadable. "I know," she said. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. This was the price of his betrayal. The cost of redemption. He looked at the divorce papers, at the prospect of losing his son, of having his secrets aired in a bitter court battle. Then he looked at the second folder, at the path to a life that was smaller, perhaps in a financial sense, but a life that was his own. A life with a chance, however slim, to rebuild what he had broken. He slowly, deliberately closed the folder containing the divorce papers. He pushed it back across the table to her. Then, with a trembling hand, he picked up a pen, opened the second folder, and signed his name on the line at the bottom of the petition to legally change his son's name to Arlo Cole Sterling. The signature was not a magic wand. It didn't erase the betrayal or instantly mend the chasm between them. It was simply a choice, a first trembling step onto a long and treacherous path. The confrontation with Eleanor was apocalyptic. James, armed with a newfound but fragile spine, met her that evening. Olivia was not there, but Chloe later recounted the story in a hushed phone call. It happened in the grand, suffocating library of the main Sterling estate. Eleanor, expecting a report of Olivia's capitulation, was met instead with her son's declaration of independence. He told her he was changing the baby's name to Arlo. He told her he had signed a post-enup that rendered her family legacy clause impotent. He told her that her control over his family was over. Eleanor, according to Chloe, did not scream. Her fury was a far more terrifying Arctic cold. She told him he was a fool, a disappointment, and that he was throwing away his son's birthright for a woman who was common and manipulative. She informed him he was immediately removed from the family trust's board. His access to the generational wealth was severed. She ended the conversation by telling him that he was no longer her son. James came back to the house that night. Olivia had given him one of the new keys after he signed the papers, a probationary key, and he looked like a man who had survived a plane crash. He was pale, shaken, but for the first time in a long time, he looked free. He didn't try to kiss her or hug her. He simply stood in the foyer of the house that now felt too big, too opulent for them, and said, "It's done." Olivia just nodded. Okay, the weeks that followed were excruciatingly awkward. They were two strangers cohabitating in the ruins of their old life. They spoke in polite, functional sentences. Did the baby sleep? I bought groceries. Our first therapy session is on Thursday. They moved around each other with a painful courtesy, the air thick with unspoken words. They put the Chestnut Hill mansion on the market. It sold quickly to a hedge fund manager who fell in love with its soulless grandeur. The sale felt like an exorcism. They used the proceeds, along with James's now finite personal capital, from his business to buy a modest but beautiful Victorian house in Cambridge, a neighborhood that felt more like Olivia's world than his. It had a small yard, a sun-drenched room that would be her art studio, and a nursery that was a blank canvas. Together, without speaking much, they painted the room a soft, warm grey. Olivia unpacked the box of items she had hidden away. The wooden blocks, spelling D-A-N-I-E-L. The onesie that said Future Artist. The silver cup with the D engraving. Seeing them in this new space, this new home, built on a foundation of brutal honesty, felt like a quiet triumph. Therapy was raw. It was ugly. Olivia laid her betrayal bare, the full scope of her pain and rage. James, stripped of his family's influence and forced to confront the weakness in his own character, had no choice but to listen. He spoke of the lifelong pressure, the crushing weight of his grandfather's name and his mother's expectations. It wasn't an excuse, the therapist was quick to point out, but it was a reason. Understanding it was the first step toward changing it. Slowly, glacially, things began to shift. The change wasn't in grand gestures, but in tiny, observable moments. It was James getting up for every single night, feeding, insisting Olivia rest, telling her, "I need to do this. I need to show up." It was him actively listening to her talk about her day at the gallery, asking questions, his phone nowhere in sight. It was him one afternoon, looking at their son, their beautiful legally named son Arlo, and saying, "He looks like you. He has your eyes. Thank God." The trust was not rebuilt in a day, a month, or even a year. It was painstakingly re-earned brick by brick. The new locks on their Cambridge home were symbolic. They were chosen together. The keys were shared not as a right, but as a privilege. Their life was no longer a millionaire's fairy tale. There were no more galas at the Harvard Club. No more fawning society pages. Eleanor Sterling never spoke to them again. But what they lost in gilded cages, they gained in something far more valuable: authenticity. They were building a smaller, quieter life. But it was a life that was real. It was theirs. One evening about a year later, Olivia was rocking Arlo to sleep in his room. James stood in the doorway watching them. The silence between them was no longer awkward, but comfortable. "I love you, Olivia," he said quietly. "I know I have a long way to go to deserve to say that. But I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be the man you thought I was." Olivia looked at him, at the husband she was getting to know for the second time. The love she felt was different now, less naive, more cautious but deeper in a way. It was a love that had been tested by fire and had, against all odds, survived. "I know you will, James," she said. And for the first time, she truly believed it. What you've just heard is a story of ultimate betrayal, but also one of incredible strength. Olivia's world was shattered by a single signature, a secret deal made by the man she trusted most. But instead of breaking, she fought back. She turned her pain into power, her home into a fortress, and her heartbreak into a battle plan. This story reminds us that trust is the most valuable currency in any relationship, and once broken, it takes more than apologies to rebuild it. It takes action, sacrifice, and the courage to tear everything down to build something real and lasting. What would you have done in Olivia's position? Could you ever forgive a betrayal that deep? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.